A harrowing clip emerged this week showing a Ukrainian soldier standing in a trench, defiantly saying "Glory to Ukraine," before he was then shot dead by his Russian captors. Here's a short clip from that moments before the brutal killing, which we won't show you. Right, so this inspired Richard Kemp, Colonel Richard Kemp, to write about where we're up to on the war. He thinks that morale is playing a critical role in the Ukrainians' defence. That sounds optimistic to me, but let's ask Colonel Richard Kemp. Always great to see you, Richard. Welcome back to Outsiders. Just give us a rundown on why that clip was important to you and really where we are in this war at the moment.
Well, I think that clip, harrowing though it was, if you watch the whole thing, symbolized the defiance of the Ukrainian people against the invaders from Russia. And he knew he was going to die. He no doubt saw the guns pointing at him. Minutes or seconds later, he then got splattered with bullets. And the last thing he said was "Slava Ukraini," which means "glory to Ukraine." And I think that does sum up the resolve of the Ukrainian people. Now, you're right to be skeptical about whether morale alone can save Ukraine. It can't, of course it can't, but it does play a major part in fighting. You can have all the equipment you want, you can have all the ammunition you want, you can have all the tanks you want, but if you don't have the fighting spirit to use them and go above and beyond, even at times when you know there's a very good chance you'll die, then you're not going to do as well as the side who has that. And I think we've got, on the one hand, we've got Ukraine, which does have that spirit. They're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for the men and women to their left and right. They're fighting for their families and their country. The Russians, on the other hand, they don't really know what they're fighting for in many cases. They're just sent there. And we've heard certainly stories about Russians being forced forward into battle at the point of a gun. And that does make a big difference, but it's not going to turn the war entirely. What's needed now, I think, more than any other time in the past, is greater support for the Ukrainian armed forces in terms of weaponry, ammunition, tanks, planes, because the Russians have certainly been building up their resources over the last few months, mobilizing maybe up to 300 to 500,000 people, building new armored vehicles, churning out masses of artillery shells, which is a real battle winner in this fight, beyond anything that all Western countries combined can provide to Ukraine.
James.
Well, so I want to ask you then, Colonel Kemp, where does this go? I mean, are we in a situation now where you've got morale on one side, you've got a massive Russian troops and equipment on the other side? Do you wind up with a long-term stalemated position in Ukraine? What is the end game? And, is there any reasonable chance that you can talk about some sort of way to settle this without, escalating it, or with just being a long war of attrition, 5-10 years of Ukraine being ground up between both sides?
Well, it might be a long war of attrition, or it might be a shorter war. I don't see any way of a negotiated peace myself, because both sides are so far apart. Putin can't possibly, let's say, return to the February 2022 lines on which he started the invasion. He can't do that. He's lost so much in Russia, so many people killed, so much economic damage, so much isolation in the world. He's hugely damaged Russia. He's got to have something to show for it. And on the other hand, Ukraine, President Zelensky has made it very clear he's not going to submit to Russia, not going to assign to them any land that they've taken in this war. So we're in a position where you can't really have a negotiated peace. I think peace is only going to come by a decision on the battlefield, by one side or the other winning. Now, I wouldn't like to predict which side is going to win. It's very difficult to say. We've got Russia much stronger in manpower terms and in terms of weapons of war and ammunition. And the only way that Ukraine can prevail, I think, is, as I mentioned just now, is for much greater support from the West. They've received a lot, but they need a lot more.
Rita?
Well, the appetite to give them a lot more has changed, particularly in the US. The polling shows that people who were previously supportive of the packages and the resources given to Ukraine are now saying enough. Tell me about the politics of that. How can the US continue to pour billions into this battle when the population is no longer as supportive of these measures?
Well, it's very difficult, and I think so far the US has been actually quite cautious in the support they've given. They've waited until almost the last possible moment to provide the key equipment that Ukraine needs. And obviously President Biden's mindful of the those people who don't want to support Ukraine or don't feel that it's the US's job to be doing so. I think while the current administration continues in Washington, we will see continued levels of support. In Europe, it's also problematic. We're seeing a drop in the number of people. I think in polling shows that the number of people supporting continued backing of Ukraine is dropping because people are getting, frankly, bored with the whole thing, and they're also suffering economic damage. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a real long-term problem. And I do think, I believe we should continue to support Ukraine. We should increase that. But it will take a lot of political resolve by leaders on both sides of the Atlantic to do so.
How much of what we're seeing at the moment, not just the Russian aggression, the Chinese aggression, what's happening in the Middle East, but throughout the world, how much of that is connected to the Biden administration's weakness? The fact that they're not exactly exuding strength and direction.
Well, I consider the catastrophic Biden withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 to be the proximate cause of Putin's invasion. I think Putin saw America and then made a decision that he was happy to invade and did so. And what you mentioned, Chinese aggression as well. I think this is a key point, and it's an important reason for us to continue backing Ukraine, because if Russia defeats not just Ukraine, but if they defeat Ukraine, they'll defeat NATO. And if they do so, then that will encourage them to greater aggression, for example, over Taiwan. They've seen we're patting ourselves on the back about the strength of our support for Ukraine, but it hasn't really been strong enough. And I think President Xi will be watching this carefully. Not only will he want Russia to prevail, and he's been supporting Russia right from the very beginning, and there are rumors going around now, based on intelligence, that he's planning to supply Russia with munitions himself. I think this is a key issue, that the effect on China of a defeat by Russia.
And what about, Richard, China, we read, are now kind of brokering some deal between the Saudis and Iran, which sounds like an absolute nightmare scenario. What's your thoughts quickly on that before we finish up?
This is another problem, and again, it's been brought about by President Biden, who has treated Saudi Arabia extremely badly since the beginning, since he started his administration, right from the beginning, and that lost a huge amount of confidence in the US from Saudi, and at the same time, he's been doing his best to give Iran more and more power. So I think that is another consequence of the weakness of the administration in Washington today.
Colonel Richard Kemp, always great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for talking to us. I know it's it's late over there in Britain. Great to see you, and we'll chat again soon. And you're 100% correct about Biden there. And of course, Donald Trump brought in the Abraham Accords, which brought peace to the Middle East. Now we're seeing the complete opposite. There you go. Plenty more coming up.